Like I said in my last video, overwhelmingly, most Americans will vote for socialist programs when push comes to shove. When push comes to shove, and even if the opportunity presents itself, as you've seen not only with the unemployment, right? We've seen individuals basically quit their job. They're like, oh, I'm at risk of getting sick. I don't want to go out there, so give me free money. Even though, of course, the essential workers still have to go out there. The nurses, the doctors, the sanitation, the police officers, basically primarily the men. And I've showed in other videos where the pandemic during the beginning, for every one man in the city, for every one man who lost his job, 10 women lost their job. For every one man, 10 women lost their job, those who were working for the city, showing that most of those jobs, overwhelmingly, that are held by women are welfare jobs. They're just resources that are extracted primarily from men and given to women to be workers. They produce nothing. They produce nothing in terms of GDP, in terms of actually producing something of value within the country that they reside in. They're just welfare workers, and the numbers in terms of labor statistics shows it. And so overwhelmingly, most of the individuals who fall or fell under the moratoriums were women. Same thing with, for example, the student loan debt. 2/3 of all student loan debt is held by women. A vast majority of credit card debt is held by women. And many of the people who lost their jobs and could not pay their rents were primarily women. And so, as a result, the government put in moratoriums. It is important to understand everything moving forward. You have to look at it from the eye of a communist. Everything moving forward is from the standpoint of communism. And so when you look at the tenets, right, the important characteristics of communism is the abolition of private property, collective ownership of the means of production, which we often have heard about lately, central planning, which you've seen firsthand, right? The elimination of unfair gaps in incomes, that has been the talk of most of 2020 and 2021, talking about the wealthy need to pay their fair share, the individuals need, in essence, need to be pulled down, and the people who are poor need to get pulled up. And of course, provision of necessities of life, which is basically UBI, right? You've heard different politicians from across the country talking about we need to give people a living wage. There's certain things that need to be made free, like free education. For many of the women, it comes in the form of free services, free healthcare, right? Need to be given money towards child tax credits. America has the highest single motherhood rate, and so all that will do is it will continue to push more women to become single mothers, because they're going to get a tax credit. They're going to get a monthly tax credit from the government, and all that is wealth extraction. It is the elimination of unfair gaps. These women can't go to work, so we need to pay them to take care of their children that they have out of wedlock. But the purpose of this video is talking about the moratoriums. And it's important to understand that the importance of the moratoriums is for the government to, in essence, create a problem and then create a solution. And recently, you probably heard of Cori Bush, who slept on the Capitol steps and basically was pushing for socialism. We can't evict all of these individuals who have been given free money over the past 16 to 18 months and failed to pay any of their rent. And the government knows this. The government knows the statistics on it. They know exactly what is going to happen. You cannot, and I said this in my video yesterday, you can't just throw communism out there and people will vote for it. You have to create the scenario where the people beg the government to push for socialism. And eventually, socialism leads to a communist style of running, right? You've seen Joe Biden just basically sign off bill after bill after bill, despite even the court system saying that what you're doing is unconstitutional, even where the CDC or other organizations will say, this isn't the right way to go. right? The governments and the courts will say this is not, you're infringing on people's rights, and then he will go ahead like a dictator, right? And this is what you see in communist, in socialist countries, where the people push harder and harder for the government to basically take over their lives. They don't want to take responsibility for going out there getting a job. Hence, oh, I don't want to go out there, I'm going to get sick, right? Even though you wear a mask, even though there's a vaccine, even though you wear 2 masks, even though there's social distancing, etc., work from home, these people will just quit their jobs and push for socialism, which is what this is. This is just a push for socialism. People who want to steal from homeowners, from people who have gone out there. Most of these homeowners that have bought many of these homes, they're not the wealthy hedge funds, right? They're not the wealthy hedge funds. They're typically the mom and pop people who have just, are utilizing this home as a secondary income, typically during their latter years. They've saved up for a number of years. They've purchased a second home that they are responsible for maintaining, with the result of being able to rent it out for some cash flow. Now the government swoops in and then says, you no longer, right? You no longer have private property rights. We are seizing your property. We're seizing your ability to collect rent from your property, because we cannot allow these individuals to be thrown out. So it's in favor of the masses, right? Because this is appealing to the masses. And this is how the government then on the back end, once these homeowners basically run out of cash, they go bankrupt. And so as a result, they end up having to sell their homes. Now, some of them will look at the market, and after feeling the pain of the moratoriums, will come out. Once the opportunity allows them to, they will then sell their property. Who is it that is typically buying up a lot of these homes? It's typically hedge funds like BlackRock, or other hedge funds like, I think it's, what is it, affiliate homes, I believe is another one. That is a real estate investment trust. And this is basically the goal. The government isn't going to go out there and just start seizing properties, because the courts will push back, the people will push back. But under the guise of, it's for your safety, right? Because we can't have all these individuals being kicked out. And so you have individuals like Cori Bush and, of course, AOC, you can see right here. These individuals are socialists, and what they push for is socialism. Eventually, under these practices is where you have food shortages, because eventually what happens is people just realize, I'm not going to be as productive, because the government is just going to seize my productivity, which is your labor, right? Especially when it comes to more strenuous labor like food production. And if you're out there and you're working and you're tending a farm, and then you see the government just print money, you're going to be like, why am I going out there sitting in the hot sun working this tractor when the government is just going to go ahead and give my labor away to these people? And that's why overwhelming, when you look from country after country, after you look from China, Japan, in North Korea, old school Russia, Venezuela, Cuba, Zimbabwe, and all these different countries, what do you see? You see less productivity and starvation, because people realize, the Bible had said that the worker is deserving of the wage. And so in biblical times, there was a tax that was basically for everybody, which was just 10%. And that went to the temple so that individuals could continue to expound upon the law, to teach the law, and of course to do all the things to help keep society morally upright. That isn't what we see today. Now, I think when I look at money that I earn from the hospital, I work as a travel nurse, it's like 40% of my income goes to paying for taxes, and overwhelmingly it's related to social programs. So literally for every hour that I work, 40% of my hourly labor is going towards social program, which is why I realized, to the point, when I really start putting in a lot of work, my income tax goes up even higher, upwards of 50%, especially if I was doing overtime at the hospital. I would see upwards of almost 50% of my labor go to taxes. And people realize that. I would ask a lot of people, be like, why don't you do overtime at the hospital? And they would all say the same thing, because a lot of times we were perpetually short-staffed. And I would ask people that they would ask, oh, why don't you do some overtime? And people realized after doing so much overtime, they were like 50% of my overtime goes to 50% of my overtime just goes to taxes, and it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth their while to basically work and only get 50% of their labor. And so as a result is you get lower productivity overall. And this is why you have starvation, and this will be the result. This is why I've said in numerous videos that the window, and this is why, see, people look at the Great Reset and they're like, oh, it's this big conspiracy by the elites, and it's not. It's that the elites understand that the system that we live under is not sustainable. Hence, going back to, you will own nothing and you will be happy. They realize that these individuals, they can't manage their own lives, even though a lot of it is pushed. But when push comes to shove, people just don't want to take responsibility for their own lives. And so they, in their minds, they were like, well, we need to take complete control over everything. That's why you see things like, oh, you're going to live in these little pods, you're going to be eating bugs, or these, I've talked about this other article about when they were saying that Americans, will Americans be eating cicadas and things of that nature? The reason being is because overwhelmingly they realize that eventually what will happen is people will go hungry. And so they introduce these different ideas of how will we be able to sustain these people. And so that's why they tell you, oh, you're going to be living in these small little apartments. They don't want you going out. There's going to be, what do they refer to? There's going to be lockdowns, carbon lockdowns. It's because they realize in that a scenario like this, that you just can't have what we have right now, right? Because they know that they're going to lose productivity. And that's why they say, you're going to live in these small houses. You're going to be eating bugs. We need to move towards EV because oil and all these other things are not sustainable, because they know that they're going to lose productivity on the back end, which is why they're going the route that they're going, and that they're going to be taking control. You're going to see universal basic income, and the government will basically give you an allotment for each individual. Which is what this is, right? That's what this is. Provision of necessities, right? They will take over and say, this is what you can eat, which is why you hear them talking about no more cows, no more, you can't eat meat. We need to move over to everything is basically lab grown, GMOs, etc. It's because they're trying to save the system. They realize that they can't keep going on the route of all these social programs. They're going to go bankrupt. They're going to cause hyperinflation. So how are they going to go about doing that? The Great Reset. You might see a great purging take place, which you're kind of witnessing right now. Those who died overwhelmingly were who? Were the useless eaters, typically elderly, and the obese. Right? These are people who are not productive for society, and so you'll see a more of a weeding out, in essence, right? There'll be a purge, a culling of the herd that will take place. Why? Because of the Great Reset. They cannot sustain this program of perpetual social programs. They realize that eventually it will just lead to a collapse. And then, of course, that's not what the elites are looking for, because in that scenario, right, they've lost all their power. And that's not what they're doing. They're looking to retain their power. Hence the Great Reset. It's not some sort of a conspiracy. It's actually quite logical when you think about it. Now, from the standpoint of people who think free and are responsible for their lives, and they've taken responsibility for their lives, this is a nightmare for them because they're losing their autonomy. For those who have given up every bit of their freedom and allowed the government to take complete control over their life, this is a godsend for many of them. Hence why, from the elite standpoint, they realize that these type of people, despite owning nothing, will still be happy because they'll be completely taken cared for to the best that the elites and the countries and the states can for these individuals. They'll still have to be productive to some way, but overwhelmingly, every bit of their lives will be micromanaged, very much like what goes on in China. Hence, you see more of the push for the credit score, right? Why? Because we cannot have individuals push back against society in that concept, right? In that concept of a Chinese credit score style government, you cannot have dissenters. You cannot have people push back. Everybody has to be on point. Everybody has to be on board. There is no room for dissent. Hence, everybody's got to take it. That's step one. That is step one. We are in control, and that is step one. And that's why you see such a great push for it. Because in that scenario where everybody is a socialist and over where you have just the top who are responsible for everybody, you might have a intermediary group. Very much of what you see right now, the politicians that you see are not in control of anything. They're just the people that you see. They're the spokesmen. They're the representatives. They're the face of the system that you see, but they're not the ones who are in control. And so you might see that with the BlackRocks. There might be a layer of individuals who are responsible for keeping the wheels of society moving forward, and they'll have certain privileges, and then there will be everybody else that will be underneath, and hence this part. Hence this. You'll see the elimination of unfair gaps. Why? Because everybody will be given an allotment. Everybody will be given UBI. This is why you hear so much talk about UBI. People giving the push for giving people a minimum standard of living, things of that nature. It's because in that system, which is what the Great Reset is, that's basically everybody's going to, in essence, be made equal. That's what communism does, right? You look at the in the DR or in in places like Cuba or in Venezuela, for the most part, everybody makes about the same, especially in places like Cuba. Everybody has an allotment. The doctor makes just as much as the guy who picks up garbage, right? Because they can't afford to create classes, but everybody still needs to be as productive as possible. And that's what you'll see in America. This is why I keep making the same point over and over again, that the window to get out is closing. That's why I've said, if you don't have a skill, this is the time to acquire one. If you have a skill, this is the time to hone that skill, because the window to get out of that system of things will close, especially if you're not a person who's looking to take it. Eventually what they're going to say is, you can't fly, right? You can't fly. You can't cross the border to get out unless you take it. That window is quickly approaching. And then some may be forced to go that route. You might realize, very much like the Jews, there were the Jews that saw the writing on the wall during the time period of Rome, during the time period of the Nazis, and they're like, I need to sell all my shit, and we need to go. We need to move. We need to find another America. That's what they were looking for. They were looking for freedom, right? America, the concept of America has been around for quite some time, which is just autonomy. It's just freedom. It's just choosing to take responsibility for your life. America has existed for a long time. It's not just in our time that the concept of an America has existed, which is why you can take that concept with you wherever you go. You can take the idea of, I'm going to be responsible for myself, and we're going to live free. We're going to live free. We're going to live off the land. We're going to create a system where we'll all become responsible while living collectively within a system of things. We are not the first people to witness another people choose slavery. If you remember, in the biblical times, when the nation of Israel came out of Egypt, they were set free according to the scriptures by God. And as Moses led them out of Egypt into the wilderness, there was a scripture where the people said, because they started to wonder where we're going to get food, they started hearing noises in the wilderness. What was that sound? Did you hear that? And people became fearful, and they said, let us flee back to Egypt. They remembered the pots filled with meat, the scripture says. And they said, let us go back to the wilderness, let's go back to Egypt, because we're going to die here in this God-forsaken wilderness. And that was only days after coming out of a system of slavery. And they were willing to go right back into that system of slavery. Very much so when after Christ came, you saw some of the older Jews in the congregations in the book of Hebrews, where the Apostle Paul wrote to the Hebrews that were still living in Israel. And there were those who had become Christians, but they were now talking about, we need to, we can't forget about celebrating the new moon. We can't forget about circumcision. There were those who were pushing that unless you get circumcised, you will not be saved. And the Apostle Paul said, let us not go back under a yoke of slavery. Even in those times where they had been set free by Christ, that there were those who wanted to go back under the Mosaic law, a Mosaic law of system of do's and don'ts, which is what many of these right? The Mosaic law didn't allow you to take responsibility in essence. There was very much a system of do's and don'ts, a very narrow way of living your life. And the whole point of the Mosaic law was to show, as the Bible says, that unless blood is shed, there is no forgiveness of sins, hence why they practice animal sacrifices. But under the law of the Christ, you now had to be completely responsible for yourself. You had to think, right? It was no longer just a series of do's and don'ts. You now had to perceive the will of God, the Bible says. And there are many people that just don't want to live that kind of lifestyle. It's too difficult for many of them. They don't want that level of personal responsibility for their own lives. And this is what you see time after time after time in society after society. You have people who want to be personally responsible. They want freedom. I want the freedom to be able to make my choices, and I want that freedom to experience the result of my choices. And there are those who make mistakes and they want someone there to be their safety net. There's those individuals who make poor decisions and they want the government to help them avoid all of the wrongdoing. There's people who get, fall into alcoholism, and every time they want someone to come pick them up off of the streets, bring them to the hospital, get a little bit better, and then they go right back out there and do the exact same thing over and over and over and over again. There's people who don't want to take care of their bodies. They don't want to hit the gym. They don't want to eat right, but they still want the government and you to pay for them. And then as soon as they get better, they go right back out there and they do the exact same thing that brought them into the hospital setting. That is not a system that is sustainable. And the elites know that. Hence the Great Reset. People are going to have to make their choice. You're going to have to make your choice. You're not going to be able to continue to live in these big cities. It's just not going to happen. They're gearing these cities to be smart cities where the elites are the ones who are going to take control. And even you've seen, like I talked about with Cuomo and certain politicians who are perhaps not on board with this style because they favor more freedom. You're going to have to make a choice because the window to get out is closing.